Welcome in, Renegades. So today we are going to be live here with Jordan Mack from the Nervos Foundation. He is going to give us a little background on Nervos Network, what it is, and the crazy capabilities, because with some of these things like RGB Plus Plus, I believe that the Nervos Network and CKB will never be the same again after this. So welcome in, Jordan. And I just want to thank you first off for being here, for taking time. I know you were just telling me how busy and like kind of backed up you are. So I really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to come and speak to our audience, kind of give them a little bit of background on yourself. And let them know what the amazing capabilities of CKB are. Like, you kind of informed me a little bit to have me do my research, and the way that you explained it, it has a lot of the same capabilities of some of my favorite blockchains, but it does it in a different way that is absolutely unique to CKB and the Nervos network. So first off, I want you to just kind of introduce yourself, give us a little bit of a background on how you got into crypto and just where you kind of were before that.
Yeah. So I'll start by giving a real quick intro just to my technical background, which is I started programming video games when I was like 12 or 13. And I just found out that I really loved it. I finally got access to the internet when I was about 14 or so, 13, 14. And it really changed my life. It opened new doors for me. It gave me the ability to download and research things instantly, whereas before I didn't have access to materials or books to be able to really learn independently. And so it took off, and I just continued with that. And I turned it into my career. And then when I was getting started in my career, I started out with some basically like websites and stuff, continued to being a full stack developer in web, and then moved into mobile applications later on. And then let's talk specifically about Bitcoin. I got into that around 2011. So it was pretty early back then, those early days. I believe that actually at the time, Bitcoin was priced under $1. There was, the market cap was very small. Of course, Mt. Gox was the #1 exchange. And I got to ask you, do you know what the Mt. Gox acronym stands for?
No, I don't.
Okay, well, let me tell you then. It's MTGOX. What it stands for is Magic the Gathering Online Exchange. It was actually a card trading place that turned into the #1 Bitcoin exchange in the world for at least a while. Yeah. This is, I'm just trying to paint this for you and how remote this was at the time. Like, there was no legitimate real exchange, right? It was this game thing. And nobody had really heard of it. It was just a bunch of people, mainly in these chat rooms, just talking about this stuff, throwing around ideas and trying to build something that even we admitted to ourselves sounded kind of crazy. So that's where it was in 2011. And I just I stuck with it. And I lost, unfortunately, I did have a bunch of Bitcoin. I lost all of that in the Mt. Gox crash.
See, that sucks, because like that would have been, you got in so early and then you got robbed of like being in early. So yeah, that sucks, man.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the mistakes you learn. So everybody out there, do not keep your coins on the exchange. That is a very stupid lesson I learned the hard way. Yeah. So you got to your keys, not your crypto thing. Absolutely true. And then Nervos. So Nervos came out many years later. So around I want to say 2014 or so. That's when Mt. Gox collapsed, right? That was Bitcoin was kind of in the toilet at that point.
So did you leave crypto for any period of time after that?
A little bit. I didn't fully leave. I always had an eye on it, was the thing, but I wasn't really focused on it. At the time, I was starting my own business for the first time. So I was really preoccupied with other things, barely paying attention to it. And also, there was just not that much going on in the news. Really, Bitcoin had gone through its biggest bear market at that point because of the gigantic crash and the meltdown that ensued after that. But then I heard about Ethereum around 2015 or so, which really started to reignite my interest in the industry, because finally here was a platform where you could do all these things with smart contracts that you couldn't do in the past. You couldn't do them on Bitcoin. And now all of a sudden, as a programmer, I realized here's all these things we wanted to do in the past, but we couldn't. We can actually do them now. And so that got me very interested again. But of course, Ethereum's got its limitation. It's got its problems as well. And so around 2019, it was late 2019 or early 2020 is when I first heard about Nervos. And for me, it was actually the tokenomics of the platform that really, truly got me interested in it first. There's a lot of different unique things about Nervos, but the tokenomics for me personally was something that I was very interested in because I had been in multiple different ecosystems looking at the tokenomics of various platforms. And I just kind of realized that a lot of the tokenomics, they made perfect sense for when the coin launches in the first couple of years. But as time goes on, it doesn't really make sense anymore. The incentive models start to break down and it gets to be highly theoretical in ways that don't really add up to me. And so I started to try to voice this in the community saying, we need to address this. We need to look into like what we can actually do because it doesn't make sense. And it was just deaf ears. Nobody really cared. Right. There was really there are some people that care, but they're so few and so inaccessible. Like didn't even know they existed at the time. And most people didn't care. They were just kicking the can down the road, right? They're short-term thinkers. They wanted to get in, get their money. I don't care what's going to happen in 10 years. But no, that's not what I'm about. I'm about the technology in the long term. I want this to become a global phenomenon, something that actually people mass adopt and use throughout the entire world for the rest of history until something is better, right?
Okay,
this is the
so
solution.
Tell us about CKB though. What is Nervos Network? And so give us a little bit of like what it is and then what drew you to it, because I know what drew me to it. But I want to know not only what it is, but you're talking about Bitcoin and then going to Ethereum, and then you saw CKB in like 2019, 2020 or 21, whatever, when you found that. Just let us know a little bit about that.
Yeah. So that's kind of what I was getting into. Is number one, it was the tokenomics that really gained my interest because I realized that these problems of unsustainability that were being ignored in other chains were actually addressed fully in Nervos in a way that was very elegant, very sustainable, and better than anything that I had envisioned myself. Right, just a very elegant solution to it. And I'll go more into that, exactly what that is later. But to summarize your other question, like what is Nervos? There's a couple different ways of explaining it. There's the stuff you'll find on most of the websites and a lot of the older materials, that are very straightforward. It's just like, it's proof of work. It's a UTXO based chain. It's modular. It's multi-layer. It's highly interoperable. It's extremely flexible.
You're a huge tech guy. I only understood about 3 of those words right there. So UTXO, explain that for the Neanderthals in the group like me.
Yeah. Well, that's going to go into a whole tech angle. So let me put it this way. What I just said there, I realized that you didn't get it. And that's why I just kind of threw words at you. It's because like, that's a lot of the stuff that you get to see in the materials. It's talking about proof of work. What does that actually mean? Like, why is that important to the user? In many cases, it actually isn't, or at least just small parts of it are actually relevant. So this is the new way that I start to explain Nervos. It starts with the stuff that doesn't really matter. It's the words that are just tech jargon. And now I'm going to actually get into why it does matter. So there's a lot of chains out there. There's a lot of doing all kinds of different things. Like for Bitcoin, its strong points are going to be decentralization, but it's got really weak smart contracts. And like Ethereum, it's great for smart contracts, but it's inflexible and it doesn't scale. And then you have chains like Solana, which it scales kind of a lot less than they claim it does, but it does get better scaled. And its decentralization is really questionable and it's always down. And well, it's got its issues too. But these are different trade-offs that have occurred. Right. And you see these trade-offs because it's not necessarily that one is right or wrong. It's just that you sacrifice one to get to the other, and you can't really get around that for the most part. But Nervos is a little bit different. It has its trade-offs too, but it's actually done things in a way where it's optimized every area so much in certain ways that it's getting more of all those qualities that I just described. It's getting a better share of everything. There's incremental improvements across the board on every single little aspect of it. And so this is the part where it starts to actually get really confusing. It's like, so there's some new features that you might have heard of in other chains, like state rent and account abstraction. Like these are big things you'll hear about in the Ethereum space right now. These have existed in Nervos on the mainnet since 2019 when it first launched, right? The industry at the time in 2019 didn't even like have a word for account abstraction. They didn't know what it meant, right? We didn't know what to call it because it was brand new, but it existed on Nervos. It's a very powerful concept, but it couldn't really be marketed because nobody understood what it was. And so the simple way of describing what that is on most chains, your account is controlled by your private keys. So anytime you want to do anything, you have to authorize that action. But what if you wanted like, for example, a recurring billing or something that automatically once a month you wanted to pay something? There's no way to do that currently. You would have to you have to go authorize it every time you want to make that payment. And that's because your account is managed by your private keys. Now with account abstraction, that's not necessarily the case. It just says that it must be managed by something. And we don't really have to define exactly what that is. In most cases, it translates to smart contract. So the smart contract, it actually controls your money for you. Now that smart contract is up to the developer. It could be very simple. It could be the one that's exactly the same and controlled by your private keys, or it could be a fully automated process. And so that adds a tremendous amount of flexibility because there's now a program that can be in charge of your funds for you. So that's an example of one of the major features that Ethereum's trying to put in, but still hasn't gotten done yet.
And it's safe, like it's secure. Everything is still like, 100% like your funds are cool.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, this is one of those. If you get a bad developer in there, he's going to wreck everything, no matter how you try to secure it, right? You could write a bad smart contract. So it depends on the quality.
All about the smart contracts. Cool.
It always is.
Developers.
Yeah, it always is. But like from Nervos' standpoint, we enable you to use any smart contract, and we provide highly secure, audited smart contracts for the basic stuff, of course. And we're constantly making these building blocks, these little pieces that are, we kind of call them like Legos is one of the things. Like you can stack one on top of the other. And these are components that are built to our standards. They've been audited. They've been looked at by the team over and over again. And so they're very secure, and it makes it so the developer can just kind of stack these blocks. And I'm saying using Legos because you understand how simple that is, right? It's just stacking the pieces. We're trying to make it easy for a developer too. So they don't have to necessarily write very much code to take advantage of these predefined pieces. But, I have to be completely honest in there. If a developer wants to do something really complicated and they don't know what they're doing and they make some big mistakes, I mean, you're at risk. That's part of the nature of the thing of a smart contract. But, we of course try to take as much precaution as we can and put as many of those building blocks in place to make it as easy as possible.
I mean, so it's as secure as a blockchain can be. Sweet.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's get into some other stuff. Sorry, I just got to check out. I don't know where I want to go here. Well, with the Bitcoin halving just happening, which I thought it was going to be on April 19th, and it looks like we had it somewhere around like the 21st or something, 22nd. I'm not sure. But with that halving. That's how we mark the bull market, right? And with CKB, I actually was honored to be part of a space talking about RGB Plus Plus, which is an interoperability protocol with Bitcoin. And they actually let me come up and speak and ask some questions. So give us a little bit of detail, not only about Bitcoin, we're leading there because of the halving, but the interoperability capabilities of CKB, and then maybe explain RGB Plus Plus a little bit, as much as you know about it and that you can give us. That would be perfect.
Yeah. So the Bitcoin halving just happened, and by the way, Nervos has the same types of halvings just every 4 years as well. We just had our first one back in November of last year.
Yeah, I remember Six Figs telling me about that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So there's similar tokenomics between them.
Nervos is proof of work.
Absolutely. Layer one is proof of work, but I mean, in it being a it is a multi-layer ecosystem by design. So higher layers and like layer 2s and stuff, they can be proof of work, proof of stake, proof of authority, really kind of anything. But the layer 1 is always proof of work.
That's great. Yes. I didn't know you could do that.
And yeah, it's made to be versatile is one of the things. So there's not really any of these limits on the way that you can design certain aspects of it.
Yeah, and that's crazy that you can do that, and it's a cross-chain platform as well, where it has interoperability with Bitcoin. Because like you were talking about, right? What got you into Ethereum? The smart contracts, the technical capabilities of, now this cryptocurrency. So just give us some insight into that. How does CKB not only do interoperability, but how does it stand out from the crowd?
Right. So on most platforms, when you look at these platforms, well, let's say these platforms, they claim to be interoperable, right? There's a lot of them. We know there's dozens of these things out there, and they all say the same thing. But what does it actually mean in terms of its implementation? In most cases, it translates to one thing. It's a traditional multi-sig bridge, and that's it. There's nothing else there. That's what they're calling interoperable. It's just having a bridge. But the thing is, like, pretty much any blockchain can do that. Nervos' approach to interoperability goes way beyond that. It's actually at multiple different touch points too. It's at the smart contract level. It has certain features in its flexibility that enable it to have different crypto primitives, whereas most blockchains have them. And don't worry, I'm going to explain what this means. Most blockchains, it's hard coded, and in Nervos, it's completely flexible. What this means is, like, so a crypto primitive is something called like it's a hashing function like SHA-256 or SEP-256K1. Don't worry, you don't have to know what these are. These are encryption and ways of doing encryption and cryptographic hashing. And these algorithms are usually baked into the platform itself. Like Ethereum has some very specific ones that it uses, and if it's not in there, if developers didn't make it available, you don't get to use it as a developer. That's it, right?
Okay.
This is important because different platforms use different algorithms, and if you're trying to build an interoperability solution to connect two blockchains together, they have to share a common pair of these algorithms. If they don't have a common pair, it's like they speak different languages and they can't talk to each other, and there's no real interoperability beyond a traditional bridge, right? That's the bare minimum is a traditional bridge. So Nervos is the only blockchain in existence where there is actually no hard-coded cryptographic primitives. It's always handled on the dApp level, on the smart contract level, which means that you can put anyone in there. So effectively, Nervos is the only blockchain out there that can speak any language and connect to any other blockchain in existence today or in the future. So this enables much more deeper functionality potentially. And the BT CKB effort and RGB Plus Plus are actually a big part of this, in combination with like Perun state channels, and there's another state channel technology coming that's also going to tie into this whole thing. So RGB Plus Plus is kind of the name comes off from Bitcoin RGB, which was a protocol that was first invented like a couple of years back, like 5 years ago or something. It's been out a little while, but in Bitcoin ecosystem, especially for something as ambitious as what they're trying to do, it takes a lot of time to really get that going, refine the protocols, and actually build the software. So it's still moving, and it still has a lot further to go. But Bitcoin's RGB is an interesting thing. It's called an off-chain protocol. It's technically not 100% off-chain, but it allows a lot of the actions that are involved with things to be offloaded from the Bitcoin chain to the client side, which means that it can scale a lot further and do a lot more. But everything that you do has a trade-off. With this scalability and reduced storage capacity that it requires from the Bitcoin blockchain to reduce fees and all that, that's all great. The trade-off is that the client now has to take care of that. So the user has to hold all of that. So they have to run a heavier weight client. They got to make sure that their data is secure. So it's not just private keys anymore. It's like a big chunk of data too. You lose that data, you lose everything. And so there's a lot more management that takes involved. So that means much more robust software needs to be developed. And then new techniques which haven't probably even really been fully thought of yet is how do you take that data and where do you back it up to, and you know, all these little challenges start to emerge. So
Right.
the CKB developers looked at this and they thought, wait a minute, this protocol that they've built is really interesting. We can actually use the CKB blockchain to interface directly with that, because again, like the CKB blockchain is extremely flexible. We have the ability to do things a lot of blockchains can't do. And so we actually found a way that we could connect to the Bitcoin RGB system directly with the CKB blockchain, interface with it in an interoperability way that nobody else is able to take advantage of. So they call that's what RGB Plus Plus is. And it uses something called isomorphic binding, which is basically saying, like, so in Bitcoin you have a UTXO, and in Nervos you have what's the equivalent called a cell. It is a form of extended UTXO, and they use isomorphic binding to basically tie these two together in a pair, so they move together as one. And so this is really interesting because you can now it's kind of like a bridge. That's the easy way of thinking about it, is because now you have assets that exist on Bitcoin and also exist on Nervos at the exact same time, and they're bound together. They're stuck together, right? But it doesn't cross over a traditional bridge, and unlike a traditional bridge, it's not a central point of failure. And this is a big one for security, because we know what happened a couple of years back with the wormhole hack, right?
The what?
The wormhole hack. I think that's a wormhole that was all over the news. Like, it was a huge hack, billions and billions of dollars stolen from a bridge, because they found a flaw in the bridge. And the bridge is a central point of failure. It's holding all the coins for everybody. So with RGB, RGB Plus Plus, it's different because there isn't a central point. Everybody's coins are individual in in the UTXO and the cell that are bound together. That's just holding one user's coins. And there's going to be hundreds, thousands of these little bindings, and they're all individual. So there isn't a central point to hack. If one person lost their cryptographic keys, for example, they would hack that one asset. That guy would lose his coins, but it's not going to lose everybody's coins. It's not going to lose all the coins that were in a bridge, for example. Much less impact from a technical security standpoint. Yeah,
like with the REN BTC hack. You know, that was a cross-chain hack. That was crazy.
Yeah. So I mean, this is something that Nervos has been looking at for a couple of years. Once the wormhole hack happened, we had our own bridge efforts as well that were going at the exact same time, and that kind of took the team back, and they had to say, wait a minute, you know, like, we're building the same kind of bridge that everybody else is, which means that could happen to us in theory too, and unless we really push the envelope here, we come with a new solution. And so RGB Plus Plus is one of these solutions. It is a completely different design that is like a bridge, like I say, but it's not technically a bridge. And let me explain what that means. Is because with Bitcoin RGB, that was intended to be a off-chain protocol. So when you take your coins or whatever, you lock it into RGB, and then RGB can move it around or whatever, and eventually it comes back. You move it back into Bitcoin. But technically, RGB is a Bitcoin protocol. So when you put it into RGB, it never actually left Bitcoin. It's still there. It's still part of Bitcoin. It's actually still managed by their UTXO system. You still have to use their transactions to move things around. So RGB is Bitcoin, but then CKB is connecting to RGB and binding with it in a way that it's on CKB also, right? But it never left Bitcoin. Right. So it's technically on both chains at once. Now, I was asked, I think last week I was asked, is it locking TVL into CKB? Technically, I guess you should say yes. I would say yes, but it also never left Bitcoin. It's in both at this point, right?
Yeah.
This is a totally different way.
You were saying it's kind of in that middle ground in the smart contract, basically, but it's held there. And then you interact with it over here, but you still have to basically use the transactions and everything over there, except on CKB. Is it still using transactions on Bitcoin when you're on CKB?
It gets tricky because it's using both. It's using both, and it's doing them asynchronously. You can actually
cost a lot. Then that sounds like it would cost a lot to do.
The initial transaction to get it into RGB, it costs a bit because it's still in Bitcoin at that point. Once it's locked into RGB plus plus, your fees can go way down because you are transacting. A lot of the actions that are happening after that point are all happening on the CKB blockchain, and then it will periodically synchronize back to BTC. But you can do pretty much an unlimited amount of transactions on the CKB side before you have to synchronize again, which
So
it just means
it would be like interacting with Bitcoin in just the first one, like paying regular transaction fees, and then you get that discount after that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like we can kind of foresee that a lot of people will go over, make the jump to RGB plus plus and CKB, and probably just leave it there because our transaction fees are remarkably low. And this comes back to the tokenomics of the chain and everything. Most of the time, just to transfer something is a fraction of a penny. And so, like, why would you go back to Bitcoin when you can just kind of leave it in CKB? You have the option of going back anytime, right? But if you're going to be paying a fraction of a penny as opposed to several dollars for a trade or something, it doesn't really make sense to go back unless you have to.
Yeah, so if you're going to be using a lot of transactions and be interacting a lot with the RGB protocol, it would be very smart to do that on CKB for the long term. And then as soon as you need to take it back to Bitcoin, boom, one more transaction fee. So basically, you pay 2 Bitcoin transaction fees and like hardly any fees because when I send CKB, it's like what 10 CKB to send it or something. It's super cheap to send CKB.
Oh yeah. It's extraordinarily cheap, and that it's usually like 0.0001 CKB is what you have to pay in fees. So that's
that was exchange fees I was talking about. My bad. Before we move on to our next subject, though, I want to touch on interoperability a little bit more. The capabilities that you were talking about with the UTXO of Bitcoin being similar to the UTXO of CKB and then having to match. How does that work with other chains like Ethereum, say Cardano, like any of these other layer 1 blockchains? You would have to make I'm a little not understanding that because you said that it's compatible with all blockchains, right? And so how is it different? So the Bitcoin UTXO is going to be different than Solana, right? And so how does it kind of know what do you have to code all of those UTXOs? How does that work?
Right. Well, there's 2 different things kind of getting mixed up here, and I understand where the confusion comes from. So okay. It's the flexibility of Nervos is what leads us to be able to be interoperable with any chain. But how we connect to different chains is different. For example, RGB plus plus is designed specifically for Bitcoin at this point. Okay. It will only connect to Bitcoin as it is, but it can be adopted or adapted to other chains. Like I think they're maybe considering Dogecoin as another one that can do it, and that's because it's a UTXO chain specifically. You have to be like the UTXO chains are of course Bitcoin. It's Dogecoin. It's let's see. You have the Zen blockchain. You have Ergo. You have Cardano. Right. There's a bunch of these out here that are UTXO based chains. Nervos will be able to take a similar approach to this to connect to most, I would say, probably all of those. If you want to go to a different chain like Ethereum, there's the traditional bridges are one way that you can do it, or state channels is probably another one that we'll be able to start to utilize in the future. Perun is a project that we're partnered with that has some interesting things going for them. Anybody who wants to look it up, it's Perun. And they are working with multiple blockchains to enable state channels that are cross-chain. And so they're already implemented on Nervos to a point. I think they're trying to work on integration with one of our wallets right now. This is a different approach to it. I would say a state channel technology is very different than a traditional bridge, and it's different than RGB plus plus. But if you had to say which one is it closer to, probably RGB plus plus. It's a little bit closer to that. It is a technically off-chain type of technology that doesn't have a central point of failure. So that is another avenue that can be explored, which will work with other chains like Ethereum and Solana's and other account model based chains. We'll probably use one of those approaches.
That's interesting, man. Like a lot of that tech stuff goes over my head. Like I'm good at math, but like you explain it in a way that I can understand it, man. So hopefully everybody else understands too, that way. So let's move on a little bit. I want my favorite thing in the world is staking, bro. And so I want to know, since CKB is a layer 1 proof of work blockchain that doesn't have staking capabilities, explain a little bit about that. Can you stake CKB, which most of us who are longtime, CKB users or short term that has really done some research, know about the staking, which is really interesting the way that it's done. It's done through a DAO, if I'm not mistaken. Is it the Nervos DAO? What is it called?
That's right. It's the Nervos DAO. Yeah. So yes, you are correct. It is proof of work based. So there is no staking at the consensus level, but that doesn't mean that there is no staking at all. So the Nervos DAO is the biggest example of a staking-like feature. Now, I'm using the word staking because everybody understands that it's technically not staking. What it is it's an inflation shelter. You lock your coins into the DAO. It's typically it's a 30-day rotating window. So it can be, when you want to withdraw it, it's up to 30 days. Sometimes it's a lot less, but it's up to 30 days. You have to wait to get it out. So it gets locked in. Cool. Now, what happens while it's in there is it's actually just accruing interest, not a huge amount. Right now it's about, I think it's like 2.25% or something like that. And what this is, though, is it's not technically interest, like I said. It's actually the opposite of that. It's to offset inflation that's occurring on the chain, which pays miners. I want to back up just for 1 second. I'll make this quick. Is one of the problems that I had with the chains I mentioned in the past and their bad tokenomics is that there's no incentive in the future for miners, right? They keep doing these halving, and all of a sudden there's not any fees anymore being paid to the miners. It's purely transaction fees, which realistically are probably not going to be enough to sustain the chain.
Exactly.
And so Bitcoin this was a big debate on this in Bitcoin, and because they're like, how are you going to pay the fees? And there's two things that they state. Either the fees are going to go way the hell up, like we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars per transaction, which makes no sense at all, right?
Yeah, no.
Or the opposite, which is there will be no fees and the chain will fall apart. I think the most realistic case that's come out is by Bitcoin core developer Peter Todd, who has actually stated that he doesn't believe that the model will work and that the 21 million Bitcoin cap will actually be increased over time. They will actually introduce inflation to be able to pay the miners to keep it sustainable. That's what his belief is, and that's what he's proposed, actually.
I'm 100% on board with that. I think it has to happen.
It probably will. It might not happen for a while, but eventually something has to change. Now, this is the interesting part with Nervos, is they've actually solved this completely. And they did it without giving having to raise that cap necessarily. So Bitcoin is stated to be a deflationary currency. What they mean by that is it is inflationary, and then the inflation keeps halving every 4 years until there's no more inflation. And actually coins are falling out of circulation faster than they're being created, in which case it is effectively deflationary. Nervos follows that same exact model, except it also has it's called a tail. It's an emission, a secondary issuance. Some other chains call it a tail emission, which means there's a flat fee that's always paid to miners to continue mining. So there's the halvings, right, that are going and paying and diminishing over time. But then there's just this, as this is going down, there's just one that's just straight across, right? You have one that's just, fee is always being paid. Now, this is the interesting part about that is, where does that fee come from? It comes through targeted inflation. It's not just inflating out of nowhere. It's targeted. It's targeted specifically at users that occupy space on the blockchain itself. And that's the only people that it affects. And so the way that it's effectively a state rent system. So when state rent, I'm going to go through this very quickly also, it's something that is emerging in the industry because they've realized, again, that the tokenomics are not necessarily sustainable. When you want to keep data on the blockchain and you pay a fee up front, After the miner has your money, after they've received your fee, why would they keep persisting your data? Why would they take care of and trust your data if they're not getting any more money? They have the money. They don't need to hold on to it anymore. They just throw it away. That's the problem with it. So state rent is a solution to that. It's you got to hold on to the data, and as you do that, you're going to receive continuous fees over time as long as you're holding on to that data. So Nervos does that through inflation. It pays inflation to the miners to persist that data over time, and like that's where it's inflationary. Now, in the deflationary aspect, it's because the halving is occurring at the same time. So that's decreasing the amount of coins coming into circulation. And then the coins that are consistent, paying the state rent, those coins are only affecting users that are persisting data, taking space on the blockchain that needs to be entrusted and taken care of by somebody. That's being paid to the miners. Everybody else who's just a normal investor can offset that inflation. And they do that by putting it into the Nervos DAO, right? They receive exactly the same amount of interest as inflation exists for the state rent, offsets it exactly 1-to-1, and it turns it into what Bitcoin was supposed to be. It's supposed to be a deflationary asset. It's probably not going to be in the future. We don't know. We'll have to see what solution they found. But Nervos has already found a solution that does exactly that.
Okay, I want to back you up just a little bit on that, because I'm trying to understand like exactly how the staking, you might have explained it, but how, so the staking rewards get paid by the state rent, the flat, when you lock it up in the Nervos DAO, that's how they're getting the staking rewards from that, basically the people that run the dApps or need storage or whatever, they are paying like a certain amount, and then part of that goes to the Nervos DAO. Do I have that correct?
Pretty much. I mean, what's the important part of this is that, you lock up your coins and you're getting that interest paid on it. And so it's basically just like staking. It gets technical, and when you start to say, where did it technically come from? It came from inflation being paid by the people occupying space on the blockchain.
Got it. So, I mean, that makes sense, dude. You said it in a very articulate way. Cool. What about DeFi though? So there's staking capabilities. I want to know about the DeFi. Is there DeFi on CKB? And if there is, where can I go degen at?
Right. Okay, there's a couple things you can do. And so there's kind of a long history about this, and I'll cover the early stuff very, very briefly. It's like we have a layer 2 called Godwoken that's EVM compatible, and it had a whole bunch of DeFi stuff going for a while, including the biggest one was ICPSWAP, and it had a bunch of other little smaller DeFi things out there. These unfortunately, they didn't do too well in the last after the bull market, and then the bear market came. A lot of these kind of got wiped out and didn't take it too much further. They're still around and they're going to be around, but they're not really thriving at this point. And they've even like announced it on Twitter that they're having troubles. But they're there for the time being for anybody who wants to use them. But the new things that are coming out are much more interesting to me. They're coming out on layer 1. Like the first one is HueHub, which is HUEHUB.xyz. It's the first RGB Plus Plus compatible DEX out there. It's pretty basic, but it is like cutting edge in terms of it's actually moving around assets that are on Bitcoin and locked into RGB as well. And so this is the first of what we hope to be many more in the future. And there's a lot of potential behind this, because what's going on with RGB Plus Plus is we are enabling things for users to do, right? More things that are easier for users to do and do things cheaper as well. And this is both attractive to the users and the developers who want to cater to Bitcoin audience. So these types of things could really start to take off pretty soon. And there's other avenues in there also that I really should mention. Like, for example, all the stuff in the Nervos DAO, when you lock in and you stake, you're pretty much just leaving your coins there. But there's another option coming out pretty soon called ICKB. And so this is kind of a liquid staking option. And what happens is when you lock your coin into the Nervos DAO, you're issued a different token called an ICB token. And so this token, you can do whatever you want with it. And it's actually, it represents your coins in the DAO, so you can go claim them again later. But this one you can take out and put into DeFi. And so this one is probably, we're hoping that he has it ready in the next 3 to 6 months. We'll see. But this is going to unlock nearly 200 million in liquidity that's just sitting in the Nervos DAO right now, not doing anything. It's going to become liquid, right? So like this could go into whatever DEX is actually available and actually start to do stuff with DeFi. So that's one big avenue that's I think is very compelling for some developers. The next one is
hold on before you go on. I want to know a little bit more about this ICKB, because it sounds like it's a lending and borrowing protocol. Is that because you're basically locking the tokens up, and then you get ICKB, and then you can go interact with DeFi, right? So if you lose money on ICKB and you only have like half the tokens, you'll only be able to collect half of them. If you double your money, now you'll be able to collect the tokens you had plus more.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the guy who invented this, he came up with a really, really interesting model, which is, so an ICKB token does not necessarily correlate directly to one CKB token, right? They're not one-to-one. They're actually changing constantly at this pre-calculated formula, which matches up with the Nervos DAO exactly. So like if you're holding one ICKB, the amount of CKB it represents is constantly going up very slowly at exactly the rate that the Nervos DAO is accruing interest. So it's at 2.25%. So your ICB, what that means is your ICKB token
is going up 2%.
It's always, it's always, its value, its floor value is always going up no matter what. And that's great for DeFi, right? That should be our main ecosystem DeFi token, should be ICKB in the future.
I can't wait for that, man. I'm already excited for that because I'm a Degen myself, and that's what us Degens like to hear. So that's cool. And finish your thought.
Yeah,
I had to tell people and kind of understand it better myself. So.
Yeah. So the last thing I wanted to mention on that was Kalani, which is a very ambitious product being put out by one of the founders, and it's to enable cross-chain. They call it's a cross-chain solver network is what they're calling it. It's based off this concept called intents, which I'm going to try to boil down and try to make simple. So when you go to, let's say, Uniswap, you go there, you find the pool you want, and you want to do a swap. You type in a couple numbers about what you want to swap, how much. You lock in your trade. That trade that you locked in is good for exactly one thing. It is that specific trade on Uniswap that you locked in. It's good for nothing else. It's just that, very, very specific. An intent is something much different. It's saying, let's say I have 10 of token A. I want to exchange it for 20 of token B. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to lock in that, and only that request, no other data. It doesn't matter. From the standpoint of a user, it doesn't matter to me. I don't care what chain you go through. I don't care what exchange you go through, what DEX. It doesn't matter to me. I'm giving you 10 of this token A. I want 20 of token B. Fulfill that any way possible. I don't care what you do. That's what an intent is. And so this is really, really powerful concept when you talk about cross-chain, because like right now, we see what goes on Ethereum, right? In a bull market, people are paying hundreds of dollars in transaction fees for a single trade, right? It's outlandish. It's crazy. But that's the reason they have to do that is because it is too difficult or not possible to go to other chains to do these swaps effectively. Like traders, they need this stuff happening now. They don't have the time to go move around and try to research 20 different places. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, but especially if you need to make a quick trade or something. Like that's the market. It's in and out sometimes. You watch the market, and so it's very important to be able to interact with things quickly and effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you get it 100%. It's like it doesn't mean that you're getting the best deal. In most cases, you're not on Ethereum, especially with that fee. But you can't take the time to go look at 15, 20 other chains. It doesn't happen. You got to go fast.
Yep.
So this is what an intent solves. right? It's because now the automated program can take advantage of this for you. And there can be all kinds of options to have solution providers come in, participate in this competitive network to actually race to fulfill user requests, right? What I'm saying is this: as a developer, if you want to make a little extra money, one of the things you can be is you can be that Uber driver that's taking people from chain to chain to chain to find the best deal, right? You actually will make money by fulfilling a request and getting a trader the best deal. And of course, that's great for the trader, right? He's got people lined up, all kinds of little robots basically working for him to find him the best possible deal on any of the chains available.
Heck yeah.
Right? This could revolutionize the way that we do DeFi today.
I've never heard that before, man. Nervos and crypto will never be the same again. I swear. Now that we're kind of winding down the episode a little bit, we got some like alpha here, some mind-bending knowledge from Jordan. And so I want to talk about some Degens stuff now that we moved from like staking to DeFi. What about NFTs on CKB, and as well as maybe meme coins? I myself, I don't really care for meme coins that much, but my audience loves them, and I support anything my audience does. So just give us those two kind of sectors, because layer one blockchains have some crazy capabilities. And I think NFTs, with some of the things that you guys have technically over on CKB, there could be some really interesting things happening with NFTs. So I'm kind of curious, what are the NFT marketplaces? Are there any big projects like Bitcoin Flower on ICP, or like Bored Ape Yacht Club on Ethereum, and whatever's on Solana?
Yeah. So I can give you a quick background into NFT stuff. So there was an NFT initiative that went back again last bull market. There was a great marketplace we had called Collect, which had everybody's NFTs in it, and everybody was happy, right? I had a bunch of NFTs that on there as well. Unfortunately, they were a casualty of the bear market again. We're very upset, just as a community, what happened with that.
CKB was really small at the time, and like the funding available in the community size, like it wasn't ready for it. So I think this bull run, a lot of these projects that didn't make it last time, or new ones, I mean, that are going to be coming out, aren't going to have the same difficulties. Because if you remember, the world was kind of crazy in the last bull run, coming out of COVID, and all the just crazy things happening with all the crazy news and exchanges going down. It was basically just blood everywhere. I mean, blood in the streets. It was just crazy. So I think this bull run is going to be different. So, and CKB was not even top 500 back then, and I think it was like number 80 or under 100 now. So I really think there's big things this bull run. I just had to say that, throw that in.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. Things are definitely different this time around, and a big part of the reason they're different is because of the technology that's being used this time. Because last time with Collect, they had the disadvantage of using the first generation NFT standards that we had come out with, which were very similar to the NFT standards on Ethereum. I mean, they were in large just a copy of that. Now, there's issues with the standards on Ethereum, and this is where they've created two new standards on Nervos that really address different ends of the spectrum in a very, very different way. So the first one is called Spore. So Spore is a fully on-chain one, and this includes all data, all the image data, whatever you put on your NFT, everything is fully on-chain.
I got it right.
So, okay, sure. And so this is kind of important because like one of the things that happened when in not just in Nervos, but in other ecosystems as well, is you had all these marketplaces out there, NFT marketplaces. And if these marketplaces went out of business or whatever, they usually stopped paying their Amazon hosting fees, right? And then all of a sudden the image for your NFT doesn't work anymore. And it's like, it's ridiculous that we relied on a setup like that, but it's also understandable as well because blockchains are very slow and they're very expensive.
Yep. At
least the decentralized ones are, right? That's the nature of the beast. And so the data though disappearing for expensive NFTs, that's a big problem. And especially if you want to move into things in the future, like NFTs that represent real estate, for example, you can't have this data just disappearing on you, right? There needs to be a way to represent this stuff fully on chain. So Spore does that. You can actually have an NFT with all your full image data on chain. And there's a really unique feature with this, which comes back to the way that state rent works and everything. So when you put data onto the Nervos blockchain, it has a deposit that has to be paid. So if you want to store 1 byte of data, it requires 1 CKB to be locked up. And so if it's 100 bytes of data you need to store, it's 100 CKB. And so it gets expensive when you want to store a lot of data on chain. But here's the thing, is once you decide to get rid of your data later on, you take it off chain, you get your deposit back 100%.
That right there is one of the major things that won me over to CKB right there when you told me that. That is definitely something that's unique to CKB that I've never seen anywhere else, like holding data that you can get back the CKB when you take the data off chain. So is there a fee? So like say I store data on there for a year. I pay a certain amount of CKB to do that after the year. Is it by year or is it just the data itself and time doesn't matter?
When you lock it up, there's inflation that you're being hit at. Remember the state rent stuff, targeted inflation when you occupy space on the blockchain. And so what this means is when you're occupying space on the blockchain with your Spore NFT, that your CKB is locked up for that NFT. And so therefore you cannot put it in the DAO. You cannot use the Nervos DAO. You cannot get that 2.25% interest. And so you're actually losing a very small amount because you can't take advantage of that, right? And so it's for most assets and stuff, we're talking about a very small amount of fractions of a penny, right? That you're paying, and over the course of years, it's probably, a couple cents here and there. It's really not that much, but it adds up. And when you talk about all the users of a blockchain, that ends up being a lot of money over time. And so that's being paid to the miners.
If the price goes up though, so say you store data on chain, get your NFT, have that, then like say 6 months later, right? Because you're losing 2% per like 30 days or however much per year. So if you're losing that, then you're also gaining if the price of CKB goes up. Because Six Figs was telling me, I was like, bro, are you still mining CKB? And he's like, nah, because the halving happened. And he's like, it doesn't make sense to mine because I'm just basically paying for the electricity. And I was like, well, bro, I don't know if I said this or just thought this. I'll have to talk to him about that. But I was thinking, I'm like, well, if you're mining CKB at 1 penny, okay, then you're only you keep the CKB though. You don't sell it at a penny. You eat the cost of the electric bill for now. Right, you still have the CKB if you need to pay it, but then CKB goes to 2 cents. Okay, now you have double the amount of money that you paid for mining and the electricity, and CKB did that recently, so he could have still successfully mined CKB, and so I think that is a way to counteract electricity sometimes. And he might have an old miner, but that's just something that came to mind when you said that,
Yeah. And actually in Six Figs case in particular, he uses the miners to heat his downstairs studio. So, I mean, from his standpoint, like during the winter, he should be keeping them on no matter what. Yeah, don't turn them off. What is he going to do? Run a space heater instead? Like, of course, use your miner. He's getting free coins for just running a small heater. Yeah, exactly.
I love it, man. I love it. You kind of already explained the tokenomics. Crypto Airborne though? He said, still mining to this day, never shut mine off. Long-term mindset. I love it, man. How are you doing, Airborne, man? Good to see you, bro.
Yeah, well, here I gotta finish telling you about the NFT stuff.
NFTs, yeah. Sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah. No problem. So Spore, I explained to you the importance of the on-chain component of that, and there's one last nice thing to mention on that before I move on to the next one, which is so you have all the CKB locked up in in your NFT, right? This guarantees you a floor price. It'll never be worth less than the CKB that's in there, because you can take that out, right? So it's a very interesting angle for any kind of an NFT artist, because they can get, we know for a fact that people pay attention to numbers and they're looking at that floor price of NFT collections, right? Here's a guaranteed way to put a floor on that. But the next one I want to talk about is the CODA standard. So this one is the polar opposite of Spore. Instead of putting all of your data on chain, it puts the very bare minimum of anything. So it uses something called a sparse Merkle tree, which, don't worry, you don't need to know what that is. What it means is that it takes all of your data and it represents it in a tiny 256-bit long string. And that doesn't matter how many NFTs you can have. You can have one NFT, it's 256 bits. If you have a million NFTs, it's 256 bits. It uses this to compress that data down and move everything else off chain that doesn't absolutely have to be on chain. And so this gives you really, really inexpensive NFTs. And so this one is exciting to me for a lot of reasons, but the main one is because this one I think is actually the key to mass adoption of NFTs, because now you can combine this with the super low transaction fee rates of Nervos, and you're creating NFTs for a fraction of a penny and transferring them for a fraction of a penny. You can't do it any cheaper anywhere else. Not on a real decentralized blockchain. Yeah, maybe that centralized blockchain that keeps going down, maybe they're similar, but it's like, this is remarkably different than anything out there because it is decentralized at a level that is comparable to something like Bitcoin, and also super low cost. Very rare that you get to see those two things side by side.
Yeah, man. Wow. You just blew my mind too much again, bro. I think I need to go buy some more CKB now. It's so weird because I was like, I'm probably not going to understand half of what he says. And then like, I understand everything except like one little part. So I'm so excited about this. I can't believe the way that the NFT structure is on there. I'm an NFT guy. Like I slowed down a lot, but I love NFTs. That's why I love the internet computer. So I'm going to have to come into CKB and really get in there. And maybe I can make some money, degen in a little bit. Did you tell us the marketplaces yet?
Oh, yeah. So the one that is out there right now, but only on layer 2, is NFT Nation. So they were on the layer 2 side, but they're adding layer 1 support right now. Like that's what they're currently working on, is they're adding the Spore and CODA standards to it. That's expected probably, I want to say, within the next 2 to 3 months, they should have that rolled out. And so that's going to be when they actually really start to promote. There's going to be all kinds of different things going on. They're going to probably start trying to roll in some stuff with RGB Plus Plus in there as well. There's going to be, I'm sure there's going to be some nice giveaways and stuff. So if you're interested in NFTs, that's when you're going to really need to be paying attention, because this is going to be kind of like the rebirth of NFTs on Nervos, and not just with an ERC or not a ERC 721. It's not a normal standard, right? These are, like I said, the next generation standards that are really going to do something different in this industry.
Yeah, those just came out like last bull run, right?
These standards, the CODA standard came out, I want to say at least a year ago, but it was still being worked on, and it was being refined. In fact, they're still adding a couple features to it. And then Spore went to mainnet just a couple months enough. So they're both really pretty new. I mean, they're trying to pioneer different directions that have not been done on other ecosystems.
Yeah, and it looks like Airborne says he's looking forward to it. Definitely lacking the NFTs on CKB, but I can't wait to see, because of such an interesting way that you guys have of approaching NFTs, and the way that you go about, like, setting that floor price, because a lot of people don't like to invest in NFTs if the floor price is just going to keep going down, down, down. But if you have like a set floor price that can't really be altered, unless they take the CKB out. Is that how that works? But then,
yeah, the process, they generally refer to it as melting. And so what we're kind of saying, if you wanted to compare it to a real world thing, it's like building a sculpture out of gold or something, right? The floor price of that sculpture will never drop below the price of what gold is.
Okay, so if CKB goes down, the floor price could go down. If
It could
CKB
go down. Yeah.
goes up, the floor price goes up.
That's exactly right. Yes.
Oh, I love that, bro.
Yeah,
That
but here
means
you're. I
NFTs
got
are
to add something to that though. You're going to love this even more. So in the tokenomics of CKB, when you store data on chain, that's locking up CKB, right? That's locking up CKB. We have the Nervos DAO that's locking up CKB. You have people doing stuff with DeFi. In future, they'll have farming options and stuff, especially with like Kalani and some of the other projects we're going to get on there. All these they're locking it up. I'm saying we're just locking up more and more of the supply everywhere, right? It's creating a scarcity of available liquid tokens, and that can do all kinds of things for the price, right? I'm not going to talk about the price. You can talk to your users about how that can affect the price, but like this is I'm talking about this because of the way it affects NFTs. Think about this. Like every time you're locking all of this CKB into NFTs, it's creating more demand for the underlying CKB, which is also pushing up the floor price of every single Spore-based NFT at the same time. It's a weird cycle when you think about that.
That's crazy, man. I can't, man, these are the things that people want to hear. I'm so glad that we had you on the channel today, man. Like some of this stuff, like you didn't even tell me some of this stuff when we talked. So you would have sold me even more. I actually went out and bought CKB. Like then as soon as I got back home from talking to you, like I started just loading up on CKB and then it went way up and now I have an opportunity to buy again. So this is great. Let's get some questions from the audience and we'll call it a day. Let's see here. I know Striker was in here, man. Thanks for your support, bro. Oh, I guess Justin remembers using Mt. Gox for trading cards. Let's see. I know we had a question. Oh, here we go. Crypto Airborne asks, how is Nervos Layer 2 solution different than Stacks? I'm not familiar with Stacks, but know they are leading Layer 2 for Bitcoin.
Yeah, so they're relying on a different technical angle. As far as I know, RGB Plus Plus is the only one out there that uses isomorphic bindings, which is very new. Like I think I already kind of covered some of the technical innovations that have happened with that and some of the benefits. To my knowledge, Stacks is not using a similar approach. So it's not to say that Stacks is not a product that has any value to it. I think that it is absolutely, and they've also have a longer history of being around. So like they have value, but they're not at the cutting edge, in my opinion. Like what is being done with the BTCKB initiative and RGB Plus Plus is absolutely brand new, and you won't find anything else like this.
That's cool, man. I like that caught my interest because I'm a Bitcoin guy, Bitcoin Renegade. Right. So, I mean, I didn't even know about this when you were telling me. You did tell me about the interoperability, but you didn't even hint, bro, you didn't even hint at me that RGB plus plus was the thing. I thought we were friends, bro. No, I'm just kidding.
I didn't know. This thing is, when we were talking in LA, I didn't really know as much about it as I do today. Like I knew very little. In fact, it took me several weeks of actually going back and forth, talking to people, reading all kinds of materials, watching hours and hours of videos, some of them not in English, that I had to translate and to get this information and really understand it. And this includes going back all the way through Bitcoin's RGB and understanding their protocol completely. I had to get at a really deep level to actually be able to explain it where it is today, and so it took a lot of time. So yeah. When we talked back in, what was that, early March? I didn't know this stuff. I'm not at nearly the same level. So that's why I didn't speak to it.
Yeah, no, I was just giving you a hard time, man. No, you told me just some things like the data storage where you can lock CKB. Now I know that you can lock CKB against NFTs because it's all data storage, right? Those are all different capabilities of data storage on it. So that it makes me really excited. I hope everybody was able to understand CKB a little bit. And thank you, Jordan. It was an absolute honor. You're a legend in the space. I know a lot of people look up to you, and I just appreciate you being here, man.
Hey, man, it's my pleasure. Anytime. I really enjoy talking to you, just like we did in LA. I hope we can do that again in the future.
Of course, man. All right, guys. That being said, goodbye and good CKB.